Thanks, you
Well,
too,
turning
guys.
our attention to the bond market, we have seen U.S. Treasury yields climbing ahead of FOMC's policy decision this afternoon. Investors will be firmly focused on any talk of potential tightening, but also look for any indication of how the Fed sees the rapid spread of the Delta variant weighing on economic recovery. To break it all down for us, we've got Yahoo Finance's Cheung tracking that today. Brian, are we finally going to start talking about tightening, or is it still going to be talk of tightening?
Well, as you mentioned, Akiko, we are set for a Fed decision in under 3 hours from now, but nothing big expected. The Federal Reserve expected to keep interest rates steady at near zero, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be interesting things to watch. So here are my FOMC3, my Federal Open Market Committee meeting, 3 big questions that I have. And coming in at number 3, the first question really is, what's going on with that hot housing market? This is kind of an interesting situation where we've continued to see housing prices increase. We saw that 16.6% annual gain on the Case-Shiller yesterday. That's the highest reading in more than 30 years of data. So could that be bleeding through to inflation? And might that affect the way that the Federal Reserve is thinking about its mortgage-backed securities purchases? There's some concern that the optics of that might incentivize the Fed to maybe pare back its mortgage-backed securities purchases before its U.S. Treasury purchases. But my second question concerns the big I question, which is, of course, inflation. How will the Fed adjust its outlook? You'll recall that in the Fed's last meeting in June, the statement said, quote, inflation has risen, largely reflecting transitory factors. But since then, we got a consumer price index print 5.4% on a year-over-year basis. That's the hottest that we've gotten since August of 2008. Does that force the Fed maybe change its language in the statement? And then my number one question for today, any clues on the timing of the taper? As you mentioned, Akiko, that was really the big question heading into this policy meeting with no changes expected on interest rates. Everyone's focused on the balance sheet. The Fed said that discussions began on taper in its June meeting, but the Federal Reserve, at least from Wall Street's perspective, not expected to offer any sort of first hints to an actual taper until maybe the Fed's August Jackson Hole meeting or even their September FOMC. So it seems like the Fed might be a differential to wanting to keep their cards close to the chest. And of course, we'll get more detail at 2 p.m. when the Fed releases its statement, 2:30 press conference. And of course, we'll have the full coverage of all of that right here on Yahoo Finance.